This collaborative effort between business, nonprofits, providers, and neighborhood stakeholders will lead to a surge of tiny houses to finally give a scalable offer of shelter to our neighbors experiencing homelessness.
That's Seattle City Council member Andrew Lewis talking about a new effort to increase the number of tiny house villages in Seattle, trying to make a dent in what is now 5 years and counting for the state of emergency declared by the city and King County on homelessness. Tiny homes, big headlines, and a whole lot more. That's what we're covering here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. Joining me is Kevin Schofield of Seattle City Council Insight, whose weekend plans include reading a 1,045-page report to the City Council and a refreshing walk. Kevin, how do you do that? Does the walk come before or after? Or what's your secret there?
Usually in the middle.
Yeah.
But, I'm just selfless this way. Somebody's got to read these 1,000-page things.
I am trying. Your kung fu is superior. I've only gotten through 19 pages so far. A big thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. That's the coffee stand on the first floor of City Hall. They're now closed due to the pandemic, but their Henry Art Gallery location is open for takeout. Make sure you support them and other small businesses too. And a big thanks to two new patrons signing up on Patreon this week. Daniel and Calandra, you rule. Thanks a lot. Thanks to all of our patrons, and a big project coming up for me, wrapping up and shipping our Seattle News, Views, and Brews mugs. They're going to be out there. It's just a little bit more of a pain in the butt than I thought to actually get these things shipped, but I'll do it. It's happening. Coming to you soon. Yeah.
You got mug, Brian. You got mug. That's great.
What are the odds? All right. If you do want a mug, jump in at the $10 level, please. And hey, whatever you can give to support local independent journalism, we thank you very much. Please do become a patron and help us keep this show on the airwaves. Thanks also to Converge Media. They run the video version of our podcast on their YouTube channel Wednesday nights at 6. All right, let's go with Right Here, Right Now. Well, it is a busy week ahead for the Seattle City Council. And Kevin, I want to break down the Energy Code and Construction Code ordinances the council has on its agenda here in the start of February. So construction codes, the council's basically united on this idea to allow mass timber materials and taller buildings, some new seismic design standards, looks like they're rolling through. But focusing on these energy code changes, we touched on this 2 weeks ago. There's a push to ban gas-powered and electric resistance space heating and water heating in multifamily residential buildings, so new apartment buildings out there. And now the council wants to get this going rather quickly. Now, originally, these restrictions were supposed to go into effect in January of 2022. The city's construction advisory board gave the okay to that, but now Councilmember Mosqueda has pushed through an amendment to move that up to June of this year. Kevin, I was just looking at this. I know there's been some pushback from some people in the construction trade. Council members Juarez and Peterson wanted to pump the brakes on this too. What do you make of what's happening here with the energy code?
Yeah, there's a few different pieces of this, and also, I'd say on the construction code side of this, there's a couple of slightly controversial parts about it as well. And one of them is there's a requirement in the construction code that more sort of townhomes should have sprinklers in them. And it's to protect sort of adjacent buildings and fires from spreading. But, it's sort of one more thing that goes into the same issue that comes in with, the pushback on the energy code stuff, which is how much more expensive are we making it to, even construct affordable housing, right? Because that, particularly for affordable housing projects, that really becomes a key issue as to, make or break for these things, because a lot of affordable housing projects are, razor thin margins for this, right? And it's one thing to have, nonprofits be the ones who are trying to do these, but if we want for-profit companies to be building affordable housing, you got to make it enticing. You have to give them at least some amount of profit. It can be a reasonable amount. It can be a reasonable small margin on it. But there's got to be at least some kind of margin, or they're not going to be able to get their own backers.
Do you see that as an issue with this energy piece too, when they're talking about?
So in fact, I've talked to an affordable housing, a private affordable housing developer who said that a lot of the things they're pushing for around moving away from gas, particularly for water heating. It could add, as much as $50,000 for like a 40-unit project.
I see. Okay.
Which could be, could be a big deal in terms of that. It's like that. That's a big chunk of money to add to this. So they're big trade-offs. Originally, Councilmember Mosqueda wanted to move the effective date up to be immediate.
Right. Right.
But that wouldn't, not only would that not give, the developers time to change over, it also wouldn't give the city, department that regulates these sorts of
Yes.
things time to do their own rulemaking and get rules out to developers and contractors about what, and architects as to what needs to be into these kinds of things.
Yeah. There's a lot still ahead with this one, and I know we're going to have some more discussion on it, but I did want to move on to something else the council's dealing with too, and I want to talk about this pleasure reading ahead we're talking about here, Kevin. This 1,045-page report from Black Brilliance that details the research King County Equity Now has done as part of the participatory budgeting process. Some background here. $3 million was awarded to KCEN for this research project by the council last year through the fiscal sponsor, Freedom Project Washington. This project is supposed to guide where $30 million in funding would go for public safety investments for the people of Seattle. Kevin, you've reported on this. Our colleagues at Publicola and Crosscut have too. And our Crosscut tells us just last week, the state auditor is looking at this $3 million research contract. What's going on?
Well, yeah. So, lots of high expectations for this
Absolutely.
Black Brilliance research project, and there's two parts to it. They're supposed to be reporting out on some research they've done in the community as to what are the theme areas around what will create public safety and better sense of community in these kinds of communities, and they've come up with about 5 different kind of theme areas. Housing and physical space, mental health, youth and children, economic development, and crisis and wellness. And so they got kind of more detail in the report as to what does that really mean, sort of in principles. And that's supposed to be sort of guidance to, like, when they get into the participatory budgeting process and look at what are potential projects that we want to let people vote on. So those are kind of the big buckets they're going to go into. And then the second part is, what's the nuts and bolts of how participatory budgeting process should work, right? And who gets to vote, and how do they get to vote, and how is this, how do projects that people get to vote on get chosen, right?
Well, welcome to representative government. I mean,
and who really makes the decision in the end on all these things, right? So they're supposed to be presenting, recommendations on both of those.
Yes,
in this report. They're going to report it out in person to the council, as a companion to this 1,000-page report in sort of 2 parts. First part is this week. At the Monday council briefing, they're going to talk about kind of their research into those 5 theme areas and what they learned from the community about what creates real community safety. And then next week, they're going to come back and talk about their specific recommendations on how participatory budgeting should work.
That's there's a lot still ahead on this, but do you still have concerns over the methodology that's being used here? I know you've talked about this before in terms of the researchers that are actually going out there. It's a pretty young set of people. They're basically skewing towards a younger set of respondents there. Is that still a concern, or what do you think about that?
Well, I need to get through the report and see what they did. And about 85 pages of the report is actually the report.
Yes,
and then the other 950 pages is a bunch of detailed reporting out of what the researchers sort of came back with. And I got to get through that and see what it says and see whether everything sort of connects together or not on that. The concerns originally were really kind of focused on how the city council went about
handing out
contracting this out, because they didn't bid it out, which they're normally supposed to do on a contract that large.
$54,000.
They used a loophole for nonprofits to do that, but the King County Equity Now, which is the group that really led this, isn't a nonprofit, so they created they picked a fiscal agent, whose annual Freedom Project, whose annual budget is has never been more than $250,000 a year to manage a $3 million contract, and so it's not surprising to me that the state auditor is actually taking a look at it. The city auditor, by his own policy can't, because he works for the city council. And
it's a conflict of interest,
conflict of interest. But the county or state auditors can, and state auditor apparently has said that they're going to look at this. So
has received some complaints.
We will see what they come up with. There's a lot of, $3 million is a lot of money to change hands. And they've got, they say they've got 100 different researchers working on that. So, that's a lot of money moving around. We'll hopefully all the receipts are in place and everything's above board, but we'll see what they come up with.
Fair enough. I wanted to switch gears one more time and talk about tiny house villages. Councilmember Andrew J. Lewis unveiled the It Takes a Village plan last week. Love the title there. This proposal taking shape over the month of February. He's talking about 12 new tiny house villages with 40 units apiece placed all around the city of Seattle. This is a public-private partnership. The city kicking in $4.2 million over the course of this year for operational costs. Private fundraising looking to get $3.6 million in capital costs to build 6 of these villages in the first half of this year, then another $3.6 for the second half. Kevin, it really seemed like there was a diverse coalition of people supporting this back last week when it was unveiled. What do you make of what's happening?
Yeah, I think this is the case where there's a history of efforts like this around public-private partnerships for homeless shelters, for more affordable housing, and in some cases they work, in some cases they can't work. I mean, just to be really clear, so what Councilmember Lewis has proposed is 2 phases of this. First phase in the first 6 months is to raise $3.6 million of capital, of which they believe they've already got $1.4 million raised from the private sector on this, and match that with the $4.2 million that the city council has budgeted for this year for tiny home villages. And that money would all go towards the operations side to actually pay for the wraparound services and the case management that go with this. Now they also have phase 2 for the second half of the year, they'd have to go raise another $3.6 million for, and then they would need to find another $4.2 million for covering the operations. And they're hoping they could get that money from the federal government, or from the state government, or some combination of that. But at the end of the day, the city may have to actually appropriate some. One of the things that's happening in the Biden administration is that the rules for FEMA for reimbursement for
emergencies,
COVID-related expenses has loosened up a little bit. And the city believes that money they're spending to bring more homeless inside into non-congregate shelter, things such as tiny home villages, is reimbursable.
Interesting.
So they think they can get some money back from FEMA for doing that. But we'll see if that really turns out to be true for this.
True.
But the hard part about this, that's been the hard part for tiny home villages. There's been no lack of enthusiasm for tiny home villages. Sure.
Citing them, I know, has been an issue.
The hard part is citing them.
Yeah.
And they'll need to find 12 sites this year. And it's not going to be easy.
No. And I know, I mean, the city last year, right before pandemic stuff really kicked in, the city council actually lifted the ceiling for 3 villages, as it was set right now, to 40 villages. I don't know if we're going to get there, but this is a step in that direction. And you can see, with a lot of support from private businesses, we'll see where that goes.
And like I said, Lewis wants to get to 12.
So
we'll see.
Steps are being taken right now. All right, we're going to move on to our next segment. Now hear this. Well, folks, the city council is moving ahead in a rather unorthodox manner in retooling its crowd control weapon ordinance, the so-called less lethal weapons used by Seattle police. You will recall the council banned these weapons last June with an ordinance. The federal judge who oversees Seattle Police Department's consent decree process said he didn't go through the right channels to do that. He blocked the ordinance with a restraining order. Judge Robart also said the ordinance would not increase public safety. So here we are now. Public Safety Committee Chair Lisa Herbold says the council will act on this measure after the consent decree process. Here's what she said last week.
Of course, this is very different than the standard process for legislation laid out under the charter. And under the terms of the consent decree, the council cannot override a decision of the monitor or the court on legislation regarding the use of force.
Kevin, you actually talked with Councilmember Herbold about this recently. Lay out your concerns over what she's considering here when it comes to the public process and her response to those concerns, if you would.
Well, yeah, so there's 2 parts to what makes this weird. One is that the way Councilmember Herbold is running this through the city council to end up with basically a draft bill that she can send off to the Department of Justice and the police monitor. She's actually not using the city council process. She hasn't introduced anything, right? Normally a bill, when it goes through, gets introduced on the weekly introduction and referral calendar, which sort of puts everybody on notice that, hey, there's this new bill, including not only her colleagues, but the public. folks like you, journalists like you and I, but
Sure.
Citizens in
I
general.
look at it every week. Yep.
That this stuff is going on.
Mm-hmm.
Puts a title to it, so we all know what's supposed to be in that. And if the contents of the bill no longer matches the title, they have to go reintroduce it. So again, it makes sure there's clarity, there's transparency, and there's consistency in how this process moves forward, right?
Sure.
And predictability on it. She's not using that.
Yeah.
Right? And there's at least 3 different ways she could have done it. She could have introduced it as a bill.
Yeah.
Right? She could have introduced a resolution saying we, want to send this, the council wants to send this draft off to the DOJ and the monitor.
Have them review it.
And attach the draft, to that. She didn't do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
She could have created a clerk file and stuck it in a clerk file. Right.
Sure.
Could have done any of those, and she's not. Right.
Yeah.
So in fact, what happened was kind of the worst case for this, which is at her last meeting,
it was running late.
The draft bill never got published before the meeting, right? So it not even in the agenda. In fact, the agenda, her plan was to vote on amendments to this thing before they, and then sort of vote on a motion to approve sending it to the DOJ and police monitor.
Right.
But nobody outside of her and her colleagues and their staff had actually seen this draft bill before they started talking about it in their committee meeting. And then the committee meeting ran way over.
Right.
The only thing that really saved them probably from an Open Public Meetings Act violation was the fact that they never got to vote to anything because they just ran out of time in the meeting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one area of concern about this.
Okay.
They're playing it fast and loose, and it means that we as the public don't know what's going on with this.
Okay. The other piece, the other part of the weirdness, I think, maybe if I can jump in here, Kevin, is just the fact that the Seattle Police Department has its own process going on right now. And what's going to be that clash when the SPD comes up with its recommendations, sends them to the judge, and how do you choose there? Talk about that part, please.
And in fact, if you go read the consent decree, I can paragraphs 177 through 181.
Here we go.
It says very clearly what the process is for revising SPD's policies, including the ones on use of force and crowd control. And it says SPD submits changes to, proposed changes to the DOJ and the police monitor. It says nothing about any other department in the city, including the city council, doing it.
Right.
I got an argument with Councilmember Herbold on this. He says, well, the consent decree doesn't say that the city council can't do it.
Yeah. Right.
That's literally what she told me.
Yeah. Right.
And I guess technically she's right on that. So what's going to happen is, as you mentioned, the SPD is in the middle of doing their own proposed revisions as they're supposed to do annually for this.
Yeah. Getting in public input on that. Yeah.
And that's been running a little late. And they've, they're kind of at loggerheads with the Community Police Commission on some of those proposed revisions. But that's going to go off to the DOJ and police monitor in the next few weeks. Yeah. And in the meantime, the city council, in fact, one of the reasons Councilmember Herbold is rushing this through so fast is, she wants the city council's proposals to land at the same time. But that's going to get awkward because now suddenly the DOJ and the police monitor are going to get these 2 different conflicting proposals for how to change crowd control and use of force policies for SPD landing on the doorstep at the same time. Now, is that setting them up to be the arbiter of which of these, they have to pick one side to go with it? Do they disagree with both? Do they agree with, it's like, how do they resolve it? And how are they going to feel about the fact that they're being put in this really awkward situation where 2 different parts of the city, 2 different branches of the city government are, basically dumping the stuff, on their doorstep and saying, hey, you figure it out.
Yeah. And the other piece to throw on top of this, guess what, everybody? State lawmakers are working on this too. Everybody should be keeping an eye out on Representative Jesse Johnson's House Bill 1054 on the use of force standards. We're talking about it this week on City Inside Out on Seattle Channel, that number of other police reform issues. So make sure you keep tabs on that too. Kevin, I'll switch gears one more time here to talk about the lightning fast passage, as opposed to what we were talking about before, a very fast passage of the council's ordinance to require large grocery stores to bump up their workers' pay by $4 an hour during the pandemic. A number of other West Coast cities have done this. Kevin, you did a great deep dive on this on SCC Insight. Thank you very much for that. At the end of the day, that 4-hour rate, in reading your piece there, I still don't think we know where that comes from. Did you ever get a firm answer on that?
No, I got kind of a wishy-washy answer from Councilmember Mosqueda. But let's start with just, being clear. Grocery workers are heroes.
Absolutely. No, you can't take that out of the picture.
You know,
Sure.
while, you know, there are a number of studies looking at approving hazard pay for grocery workers, and
Sure.
and many of them got some sort of voluntarily by their companies back in
about
kind of
$2
the
an hour.
early days of the pandemic last spring. Most of those got discontinued over the summer.
Yep.
Some are still giving, you know, appreciation bonuses from time to time, but
Yes.
it's nothing sort of really predictable for these folks. But, you know, and Seattle has at this point probably the highest minimum wage, $16.69 an hour for, you know, for
grocery
effectively
work.
for grocery workers. Of any of the cities looking at adding hazard pay right now, there's probably at least a half a dozen that are looking at doing it right now.
Okay.
$16.69 an hour is not a living wage in the city, right? So, you know, even if we didn't have a pandemic, grocery workers would really have a hard time getting by.
Yeah.
On,
well,
on,
I don't know if even $20.69 an hour really measures up to Seattle. I mean,
it's a little closer, but you know,
course,
it's still there's still a pretty big gap there. So, you know, do grocery workers deserve to get paid more? Yeah, absolutely. And particularly, you know, there's certainly a lot of justification for hazard pay for them.
Yeah.
But the question is, you know, why 4?
Yeah.
Why not 6 or 3 or 5? You know, how did they arrive at this number? And the answer I got back from Councilmember Mosqueda was kind of two-part. One part was, well, this is what the other cities are doing.
Right.
And the other was, well, you know, if you're working like a 6-hour shift, it works out to somewhere between an hour and a half
extra pay.
Of extra pay. A day, and you know, so that's more time for them to you know, come home and clean up and make sure they're not bringing stuff into their home. And you know, it's you know, at some level you could sort of see that, but it's pretty squishy, right? So they got a $4 number that they kind of just sort of like plucked out of the air.
Interesting. And I know you did some deeper dives too on how much money the different grocery store chains have made over the past year. The Brookings Institute, I quoted them last week, but didn't do the deep dive that you did here. There's fascinating work here. There
is this mythology that's going around that that retail companies have been making windfall profits in the last year because of this. And, you know, retail companies is very broad. That includes, you know, Amazon and a variety of other.
They made a couple bucks.
But, you know, within the entire kind of retail sector, right, the grocery sector is probably the lowest margin of any of them.
Right. Okay.
They're enormous businesses. They're super like personnel intensive. So like they're just massive companies with hundreds of thousands of employees. Right. And, you know, and even, you know, even Amazon, right. That doesn't have, you know, has very few retail storefronts, right. Other than, I mean, they do have Whole Foods, right. That's not like the volume of storefronts of like a Safeway's or Kroger's or something like that. But even, you know, the e-commerce part of Amazon's business, right? It's still a ridiculously high personnel intensive business, right? They want to have more robots, picking material off the warehouse, but it's still mostly people right now. So they've got like 1.5 million people worldwide that work for that company, right? So, and it is still a very low margin business, right? Because almost all the revenues that come in go right back out the door for cost of goods.
Right. And workers too, when the crowds start coming in, they got to hire more people. I mean, that's the math there.
So I looked at the math for the two big kind of retail grocery chains here, which are, you know, Safeway, Albertsons, and Kroger. And, you know, both of them, when you look at the, you know, the entire profits they made over the last year, it's less than $4 per employee.
Okay.
So, you know, if we start, you know, requiring those companies to pay them $4 more, you know, per hour.
What does that mean for the price of goods that we pay for?
Then it's going to be unprofitable for them. So the stores, you know, will, and you know, these companies don't make sort of broad decisions about this, you know, the grocery business is,
it'll be a regional thing.
They make it on a store by store basis, right? They open stores and they close stores based upon when they think a store is going to be profitable. They absolutely have the data systems that let them figure that out. So, you know, if there's a store in an area where they think the local community will pay higher prices for groceries, they'll raise the prices and keep it going.
Wow.
But potentially in a lower income community, right, where there may not be that flexibility for the local community to pay more, they may say, look, there's just no way we can actually keep that store profitable.
Right. So much more to that story than meets the eye. I appreciate the breakdown there, Kevin.
It's tough. I mean, it's really, really tough.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to our final segment. What's next? All right, let's talk COVID restrictions here, folks. The governor is loosening them in King, Pierce, Snohomish County, allowing restaurants, entertainment facilities, gyms to open at 25% capacity. The West region, remember we have 8 regions around our state now with this. Grays Harbor, Lewis, Pacific, Thurston counties, they're moving along too. Health issues aside, just for a second, Kevin, I thought this was a very stark division between East and West in our state. The Restaurant Commission brought this up in a press conference saying this looks great for half of our state, but what about the other half? It's a very interesting dynamic we're talking about now.
It is. And, the state is trying to be very data driven on this.
Yeah.
Looking at, in Western Washington, the new infection rate is dropping really, really fast.
Yep.
In other parts of the state, it is not.
Right.
But at the 30,000 foot level, it does look at one level like it's pretty unfair. And a lot of it is mask wearing. Right. It's mask wearing and other, PPE, and are people actually, taking the right kinds of precautions around these things.
Sure.
And that's only going to get more important in the coming weeks because these new variants that are more transmissible and one potentially more deadly are starting to spread around the country. Right.
Yeah.
And, and let's be honest, they're here already.
Yeah. Yeah. Those different variations.
Them yet, but think how long it took us back a year ago to detect that COVID was here. Right.
That's right.
By the time we, had a week or two of detecting it and saw the number of cases that were here. The researchers who looked at these things said there were probably already at least 1,000 cases. Right. Yeah. So, by the time we, detect the first couple of the more, transmissible variants here, there's probably at least 1,000 in the state. Right?
Wow.
And spreading really fast.
Yeah.
And again, for most folks, there are no symptoms of this, right? They're contagious. They're spreading it before they have symptoms, right? So
dangerous.
The public health folks are saying it's time to up your mask game, get better masks, wear them, make sure that they're fit well, so things aren't escaping around them, and so long as there are enough of the really, sort of medical grade and good, N95 masks for our medical first responders, if we can get more people in the community wearing them, that's going to help too, right? So we should all, I've just ordered a bunch of new masks, and just to make sure that I'm really doing the best I can there, and that's to protect me and everybody else I interact with as well. And that's something we're all going to have to pay much more attention to. So it's great that the governor thinks we can move to phase 2, but it's going to be on all of us to make sure that we can stay there. And it's going to get, it's not going to get easier in the coming weeks. It's going to get harder. A few months from now, when we start seeing a significant portion of our population vaccinated, maybe it'll get easier. But we're a couple months away from that.
I was going to say vaccinations are not a magic bullet by any stretch. We need to keep up with a lot of different practices here for sure. We always like to wrap up our podcast with a tasty treat to have with your coffee break. And Kevin, if a picture paints 1,000 words, then why can't I paint you? I'm talking about bread, my friend. Take a look right here. This is the very special. I wonder if I can get it in good angle there. Too much light on that thing. This is my mother-in-law's special recipe here. I think you can see a little bit of that. There it is. Ooh, it is. This is the
butter on there.
Oh, you better believe it. This is the Dutch oven recipe. Okay, so what you do is you kind of get the stuff together, and we're talking about your flour, your water, your salt, just a little bit of yeast there. Get all that together. Let it sit overnight. Then my mouth's watering just talking about it. Then you get the Dutch oven in the conventional oven, I should say. Get it going for about 40 minutes, and then get that stuff that you've created there, that dough, put it in there, put it back in. I got to say, fresh out of the oven, I don't know if I've ever tasted a better thing in my life, but this is the stuff, especially during the winter months. I love my Dutch oven bread. Your thoughts on this creation?
Dutch oven bread is, it's a traditional way of making bread that goes back for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years now at this point to do that.
I'm guilty of it in Boy Scouts for sure. Yeah.
Traditional East Coast recipes that do that. It's super yummy stuff.
Yeah.
I make cornbread that way too, right?
There we go.
And you don't even need to have like the whole, Dutch oven to do it. Like, I'll make cornbread in a cast iron skillet.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just the same thing. You preheat the thing in the oven, pull it out, stick it in. One of the interesting things about kind of yeast breads like that is the longer you leave the yeast to do its thing, the more interesting flavor you get.
I see. Okay.
So, even making just traditional bread, you can leave it out on the counter or, kind of in a warm space to rise for a couple of hours and then go bake your bread. Or you can stick it in the fridge overnight.
Yeah.
Right? And then it gets like 10 to 12 hours to do this thing. And the taste is totally different when you do that.
Yeah.
Because a yeast has had time to go like do its whole thing on your bread. And it creates all these awesome flavors in doing that. So the longer rise time you give your bread, the better it tastes.
Oh man. I gotta say, Kevin, the advice you give, always better than sliced bread. I appreciate it, sir. Yeah, once again, another great podcast we accomplished here. Thanks a lot, Kevin. I appreciate it, man. I want to make sure that I let everybody know, if you want to get in on the Patreon gig for a Seattle News, Views, and Brews mug, we ask you to jump in at the $10 a month level to get your very own. Kevin and I would definitely appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for checking in here to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. So subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen. And please do support us on Patreon if you like what you're hearing. We need your help to keep this thing rolling. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We will see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2021.